Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news for Monday, August 26, 2024. Trying real hard today to start off on the right pages and the right foot. So often I don't. For the catch-up section today, I can be fairly short and sweet because mostly all I've done over the weekend is take it easy. I've had this medium emergency I've been dealing with has motivated me in part and revealed some other issues that needed to be dealt with to do some more physical activity. So assembling furniture, moving things around, things like that happened a lot this weekend. Also, in fairness though, I was watching Sunny on Apple TV, which is not a finished series, and I kind of hate how little content there is on Apple TV and how slow they are to release it instead of just releasing everything out at the same time. We are very much between Amazon Prime TV and Apple TV and Hulu releasing games that, Hulu releasing content that is still airing in bits and chunks. Like, I am really just getting back to appointment TV in a lot of ways, because yeah, there's new Futuramas airing on Hulu also, and yeah, Solar Opposites is a very weird show in the sense that the episodes they make that aren't about the main characters are way more interesting than episodes they make that are about the main characters, and they really just have a dumb bad premise going on as far as their initial setup, aliens living on Earth, being just a sitcom. But yeah, I worked a lot also on the newest version of my macros to open the news, and I made a very good amount of progress there, but it's not quite finished. This is just to speed up the process of opening the news. Meanwhile, I'm not really scheduling any videos still, and I'm starting to wonder if it isn't probably better to just accept the gap for this year and just not schedule anything new until 2025, although that is still quite a bit of time away. On the SteamDB charts here, I'm not sure I made too much tweaks here, but I am also made some progress towards trying to keep everything looking exactly the same visual themes as Steam, same colors, same fonts, same font size, font weight, things like that, as best as I can figure out how to do it in a quick and dirty way. And so SteamDB in itself has these odd points where you have blue and white and green, and then when you hover over you have something that very much does not look like Steam. And I may not bother on the hover over to try and fix that, but even the background color here is not quite exactly the same. Now, arguably, you could say by trying to thematically match everything to look like Steam, you're certainly not creating your own style. And so there is a next logical step to try and create your own visual style as far as colors and differentiate yourself as a streamer, as a content creator. But mostly I'm still living on the thought that these thumbnails in particular are designed to be with a blue background that is on the Steam pages, so I'm trying to make content backgrounds that would match the thumbnails, which are the most important thing. I also didn't give any extra thought into grabbing all of these trailer videos and doing something with that, although that is definitely a thought. Notice here, as I'm scrolling down the current 24-hour peak of games and players, there's not a lot to say about Black Myth Wukong. The numbers seem very high. I saw a news story we'll talk about later. It seems like PlayStations are selling quite a bit in China and selling out potentially. So there is just still a large amount of people still playing the game, which at most I think is really just telling me what the average gameplay length of this game is. I'm not sure what the replayability of the game really is. I've heard it described as a boss rush game, which would mean there's only a certain amount of replayability on there. But yeah, not hearing any news story around it, which in fairness, when a game comes out, whether it's received well or not, there's not likely, and there really shouldn't be any news about it in the first few days of its release, unless it is just news saying the game is a buggy mess and don't buy it. Reviews in general. Deadlock is out now. It has an official picture and all, and I watched a little bit of a YouTuber trying to explain it, and it does seem like it is a lane based esports kind of game. Weirdly to me, it seems like there is only one map, so I think very quickly they're going to have to throw in at least a second map. But it also definitely feels like it is just a game that is going to want its player base to play over and over again the exact same maps, and I assume Valve is hoping that works. This is interesting, hovering over Dead by Daylight and seeing a Lara Croft crossover video, which that might be a little bit of an issue, certainly. And then this Space War from Telltale Games seems to be still being played by quite a lot of people, surprisingly. I'm not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel at all. I think I'm just done with it. I'll probably do the single player stuff, but at this date, more than likely I am just going to fall down in ranking, and almost certainly I'm not even going to get the rewards for any of the events going forward, including the current one. There is also this point and, well, yeah, I want to call it a point and click adventure, but it really isn't. It's a text-based adventure, more like Sierra Games, that's not on this list, that I'd want to mention. It is a brand new game. I have heard from a review that the text parser is better than older games would have been, but it is also still just kind of a weird kind of game that I think I'd have a level of difficulty justifying or finding the motivation and the fortitude to stick with, particularly making content around that. It definitely seems like that would be a hassle, to say the least. One of the things I definitely need to do is I take steps between either tweaking other HTML CSS code, which is a more simplistic artsy kind of programming, and then programming the macros. I'm trying to bounce between those two and keep my efficiency very high. But yeah, I need to redo this chart to be in line with the color palette, at least to some level. At least have a blue background and white text. Clearly I also need to make this chart a lot more scaled down, as far as not showing just a top 100. And you can see here Valheim is really defining now that we have 5 data points where you just start to see a fairly large drop off. And if at the end of the year I was talking about Valheim or Rocket League, then I'm probably not being very focused on the actual games that made a big splash that year. Yeah, Binding of Isaac Rebirth is kind of a great example too, in that there are going to be just a lot of games that are constantly replayable. They have their audience, and that audience is just going to keep on playing. But yeah, this here, Darker and Darker, and this here, Crusader Kings, indicate bigger drop-offs, where the rest of these are still fairly linear. And in the end, it probably will always be fairly linear, because the only way I think this chart could possibly have major drop-offs is if there was just a group of games that were played a lot and made it to the SteamDB Top 100 chart, and then there was a huge gap in the middle of games that weren't played that much, to the point where that gap in the middle would have to be different games, each taking points away for the slot that they're in. If there was just like one game that one week was in the first spot, and then another game that one week was in the first spot, and you had 52 games that were all in the number one spot, that would make those numbers go down. Although inherently that also would show where the real changes are happening, is perhaps at the bottom of the top 100 list and less at the top of the top 100 list. That being said, we do have Black Myth Wukong right now beating Counter-Strike 2. Yeah, there is definitely an argument for a bigger blacklist at the, well, I don't know if end of the year is the right time to do it, but maybe that would feel like the right time, certainly. And eventually a new game will come out, and it will just be this, and it won't have any of the previous day's colors in it at all, and we haven't seen that yet happen. And here's me using Firefox's inspector to get the colors and the settings and the fonts and everything from Steam's front page, so I know exactly what color they're using. Although Steam doesn't make it easy, because it is doing a gradient, and so there's this whole JavaScript making different colors in the background. And almost certainly that means that this is more artsy, but it also probably means that these pages don't load as fast or scroll up and down as fast as they should. Of course, most people's computers are going to be so overpowered when it comes to what you'd actually need to display a web page, nobody's going to really notice. But yeah, some slower computers may just struggle. And man, if you're struggling to load Steam's front page, you're definitely going to be struggling to play any games. Concord came out to what seems like a mostly flop from what I've been hearing, in that there's just not enough of a player base. Let's investigate that further. Yeah. Online now there's 180 people playing. Its peak players has been 402. Now, PlayStation, I think, paid quite a bit to have some level of console exclusivity here. Well, they are straight up publishing it, and they may have acquired Firewalk Studios, but on Steam and PC, the peak player base is really, really small for a game that is a player versus player game, online PvP only. Yeah, and I almost wonder if this isn't just a lot of follow the leader. Remember, Sega also had a game that they briefly put out and then gave up on and shut down with, it seemed like in less than 3 weeks. That was just a player versus player. It was a heist simulation game, a little bit more. So yeah, a lot of games here feel like they were trying to copy Overwatch or Overwatch 2 and are just extremely late to the party. Concord in particular doing a pretty terrible job of convincing anybody that there was a interesting character set in the game at all, or an interesting gameplay style. I almost wonder if this isn't so much follow the leader chronologically as this might have been follow the leader as far as every single company realized that Valve was putting out something like Deadlock, and as such every single company rushed to put out their games before Deadlock was released, or Valve managed to put out Deadlock in a rushed fashion to compete against things like Concord, which that doesn't make a lot of sense in this outcome. 1 second as I swallow an allergy pill. Yeah. I do think this might be the first failure to put on the shoulders of the two new people who are in parallel claiming that they're in charge of PlayStation. But this also might be just Jim Ryan's mess being cleaned up. That is also a possibility. It is getting reviewed well though, so it is important to point that out. They're mostly positive for the people that are playing it, just not a lot of people playing it. Meanwhile, when you look at the new and trending, we have a adult game and an adult game, or at least two games that look like they're adult games, making the trending. Black Myth Wukong. Its predecessor looks almost exactly the same as Concord, and it's free to play. Madden making the charts, interesting. And some other games. Intravenous 2 is probably the one that should be talked about more, in that the company bothered to give away Intravenous 1 for free, and you can see now they are overwhelmingly positive for the release of Intravenous 2. There was a conversation I saw on Reddit about how pirates must be the most cursed setting for video games, and it really is. I just don't think the concept of pirates alone works. It works in the sense that you can take the best of the best from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies that Disney made and do something with that. And admittedly, the best of the best of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies that Disney made were heavily influenced / stole ideas from The Secret of Monkey Island, but when Secret of Monkey Island works as a comedic pirate parody, not inherently a pure pirate simulator game. I hear Sid Meier's Pirates, which is a very old game, is still very popular. But if you're talking about a game from decades ago, and that's your one thing to point to say pirates are successful, inherently I would assume what the case is that pirate stories pirate books were popular decades and decades ago. I don't even know if you're talking maybe the 20s, the 1910s, maybe even the 1890s, but they got so played out and so cliched. Treasure Island, inherently, just establishing and creating cliches, and that then get replayed over and over again. That by the time you get to video games, everything just feels played out and cliched, and you really can't have a major resurgence with the concept of pirates. And even if you could, why not just put it in a fantasy world or a sci-fi world so you have more opportunities to do more with it? Space pirates adds the whole space element to lean on and steal ideas from. Fantasy pirates would actually make some more interest on it, in particular if you were in a pirate world and there was a bunch of elves and dwarves and things like that, Tolkien-esque characters that were also pirates. But inherently also, video game wise, the setting of being on the ocean makes the entire game a water level, and water levels always suck. It's just not where your focus really should be. And yeah, if it weren't for Sea of Thieves, and if it weren't for Skull and Bones, two companies competing to blow money, we wouldn't even be talking about pirates games. Otherwise, there's not a lot going on. I saw some YouTubers playing this a little to the left, and yeah, it looked like something that my OCD brain might enjoy, as far as figuring out different ways to sort and organize it. Although at a certain point I have so many things in the real world that I need to sort and organize. Playing a game to sort and organize is a smack in the face towards that. Hades 2 is an interesting example of a game that I believe is still in early access and hasn't actually come out, so it too would not show up on the SteamDB Top 100 chart. It's just not popular enough for that. But then there is a potential argument that maybe it should be talked about as far as an end of the year wrap up, if end of the year wrap ups even need to exist, which is also a big question too. I think it makes some sense to do end of the year wrap ups. If anything, it might make some sense to do end of the year wrap ups. Well, no, I still think February is about the right time. I was about to say do them in October, because clearly the year for gaming should start just about in August, and then there should just be a lot of nothing at the end of the year. Yep, some of these games like Conscript still, I guess, getting attention. Alright, so here's the big reveal for Video Games Chronicle. I did manage to work on these news sources. It doesn't look like there may be a ton of news. I may have skipped some because of me working on my macros, so that might be an issue. But I did, I think, pretty much 100% of the way manage to change the appearance of Video Games Chronicle to match something that looks fairly good. There might be something wrong with the fonts, and maybe I should get rid of the fonts and just let Video Games Chronicle use the fonts it wants to use, instead of trying to force it into the fonts that Steam uses, because particularly here, this does look a little blurry to my eyes. One of the furnitures I assembled was going to put a monitor in front of my face, closer than the 8 feet away. Frankly, just right in front of my face, so maybe 2 or 3 feet away. But then I needed to move another TV and use it for that. So until it may be months, maybe years before I get that furniture back. But whatever. But yeah, to my eyes on my screen, this looks a bit blurry. Looking on the screen preview, which is scaled down, it looks fine. But yeah, Steam has a drop shadow on the text, and yeah, this barely even looks like it. We really are going to get to the point where Video Game Chronicles articles and GameDeveloper.com articles and Komatsu articles are all going to look so close that you won't even be able to tell which ones are which. I'm still, while keeping the scale, not really able to stretch this out as far as I would like, but that's fine. It does seem like everything is fitting in the right place. And then all the fonts had to be changed to blue, although hovering over them turns them to orange. Remember, GameDeveloper.com has a orange and white theme by default, so I need to go back and adjust that if I care. And some of this was working, but some of this needs some more work as far as tweets and embedded tweets. Like here should look closer to something like that, where it should be white text on a black background, but the black background didn't work on this page. Then we've got a VGC right here in the little corner, and I guess we'll leave that. I did manage to get the bottom overflow page footer to disappear, and that took a lot of work because for some reason they were hard coding and intentionally making it so that there would always be a massively long white bottom to the page. I have no idea why they're doing that. But yeah, for comparison, this is what Video Games Chronicle looks like by default. Black text on white background. Here, I think the font for the headline is a little bit better, but notice there is less of a stretch and squeeze going on the picture, plus this annoying little corner tab taken out. Then you get to this, and everything clearly not stretched to the right size. And here's the page overflow. And remember, this is also still using uBlock Origin cosmetic filters to really eliminate a lot of the content. So this is truly without much interference as far as ad blocking goes, how you're supposed to be reading these pages. It's just an incredible mess of stuff. It's just a lot. So yeah, that just changing the CSS without turning on ad blocking would turn it to look like this, just to show it. But yeah, that is no way to present information. So yeah, massive amounts of work. Unfortunately, still having to use uBlock Origin and the CSS override extension that I have. I'm not sure what it's actually called. CSS override is what it says. I would prefer to just be able to CSS override everything and block the other visual elements and limit how much uBlock Origin has to do, because that would just increase the performance of the pages when they load, when you interact with them, and that is a factor when I'm opening hundreds of pages, potentially. So let's actually read the news now. Sonic 3 movie social media account teases Keanu Reeves as the voice of Shadow, which, okay. I guess Keanu Reeves was a character in Death Stranding. Inherently, I would have to say I kind of don't care about Keanu Reeves. He was in the movie The Matrix, and that's pretty much, I think, all I can put him in, unless he's in one of those. Liam Neeson is in Taken. He might be in that other movie series, but I haven't even sat through that. But yeah, he really hasn't done much. I guess Bill and Ted Face the Music. I thought Face the Music was alright. But yeah, he hasn't really done a ton as a movie actor. He's probably one of these kinds of movie actors that should have taken TV roles for just the consistent pay. Although he probably would have just gotten typecast as a stoner hippie, which is what he still kind of looks like. But yeah, there aren't enough movies being made these days for movie actors to really succeed and do great work. And of course, it's hard to really care about The Matrix. Like, I have on my long list of UHDs I want to buy. Like, theoretically, I'd like to own The Matrix on 4K or even 8K UHD, because I imagine they would spend the money to upscale that and make that look interesting. But the only way they're going to sell it to you is if you buy, like, probably the Matrix box set of 1, 2, and 3. Did they even make a 4? Maybe they did. Yeah, they did make 4, didn't they? And weirdly, I imagine it probably won't include the Animatrix, which is more interesting, frankly, for me to own. But yeah, there's several movies that people get obsessed with. They just see it when they're a teenager and they just talk about it way too much. The Matrix was one of them. The Big Lebowski is another one. Godfather, Scarface, I think, are another one. Other examples of things that people get a little obsessed about and talk about too much. Fortunately, I do think that's kind of died down. I don't think teenagers these days are just having their mind blown by a single movie to the point where they would talk about it for years on end. A lot of people, I think, define themselves by having a favorite movie, whereas if you ask me, I'm not sure I really could even say what a favorite movie is. It's probably the Rocky Horror Picture Show. If I was going to pick something, that's the one I watch the most often, maybe once every 2 or 3 years. Whereas everything else I don't really watch more than once. Streaming certainly has killed that kind of fandom and the need to rewatch things. So, Keanu Reeves being the voice of Shadow just sounds like it's stunt casting to have somebody who I haven't inherently thought would have been a good voice actor be the voice actor. And increasingly we're seeing stunt casting happen instead of animation or semi-animation, getting proper voice actors who actually know what they're doing. So on one hand, we may be seeing a rise in success for video game movies and TV shows. On the other hand, we're seeing a degradation of what the product could be by stunt casting, having Jack Black play Claptrap, for instance, in the Borderlands movie, or Bowser in the Mario movie. Although there was really not a lot of complaining about his Bowser. A lot of this almost certainly has to do with just COVID era pandemic things being changed, face actors getting less work and less movies being produced, and them moving into the voice acting, which inherently highlights how, as far as the Screen Actors Guild is concerned, voice actors are second-hand citizens to face actors, and the people with the most celebrity are going to be kowtowed to and treated better. The next story we have here is Crash Bandicoot 5 was cancelled in favor of live service games. That's been claimed, which is definitely believable for the time. I guess I didn't work on stretching out the YouTube videos as much as I should have. So, yeah. One of two things need to happen here. I'm not going to watch this whole trailer, but one would be to either stretch this to the full width, which is probably the right move, because that will be less content ID automatic strikes, for lack of a better term, matches is the real word, but yeah. Or at the very least I need to center it. And inherently that is going to be always the issue, is that in the middle of these live streams I'm going to realize there's some tweaks that could be made, and then that is just the wrong time to actually do it. So I'll have to remember to do it later. PlayStation launches a new capsule fashion collection with the Japanese street brand SOPH, S-O-P-H, which, in fairness, it's fairly subtle, but if you're buying expensive clothes, why are you buying expensive clothes with brands on it? One could say the exact same question for Nike shoes, but yeah. Inherently, if I was wearing expensive clothes, I'd want it to be so expensive that people are actively complimenting me and asking where did I get that shirt, where did I get that outfit, and then you can say the name of the outfit. What are you wearing effectively in the real world? But yeah, personally I just don't see a PlayStation logo or even a Nike logo on something and go, oh, that's expensive or that's high quality. I just see someone has chosen to be a walking billboard for a product, and that seems less than intelligent to me. I'm trying to be nice about it, but yeah. And inherently, when you just have the PlayStation logo on it, you're selling to major fanboys here of the console itself instead of an actual product. If Mario was on the shirt, then I could see younger people in particular being hyped about Mario and going, oh yeah, I love Mario, so I'm gonna wear Mario on my shirt. But if you're walking around with just the Nintendo logo on your shirt, that's kind of weird. Unless you're an employee for Nintendo, then it makes sense. It is also important, I think, to point out that by the time you're about 16, you should start to get rid of all logo shirts and any text on shirts anyways. You're just gonna run into so many situations where there's a boss or a principal or a teacher that says you can't wear that, or that it's unprofessional to wear that. Inherently, golf t-shirts are about the most casual thing you can wear. The golf t-shirts are like short sleeves with a button-up neck and a collar, and maybe they have a logo over the breast pocket, a small logo over where a breast pocket would be. There isn't actually one there, but usually they don't even have that. But yeah, you really should be looking more towards button-up long sleeve shirts that you would approach suits and ties and slacks. Many places you can get away with jeans, but you probably should own slacks also. But yeah, just get used to dressing like that. That is going to be your work uniform. That's going to be your school uniform in many cases. And yeah, there's just kind of no reason to even waste money on stuff that would never really feel appropriate unless you're going to clubs. I guess if you're rich and going to clubs, this might make sense. And that's, I guess, way more to say about that than I thought I would have had to say about that. Valve has officially announced Deadlock weeks after footage started appearing online. The game is in early development, it says. I would agree with the early development element. It definitely feels like they may have been rushed a little bit to release it, where they may have wanted to put out 2 or 3 maps in the initial launch. Now remember, this is also the game that had a skyhook type mechanic where you could jump up and, or at least one character could jump up and skyhook and swing around in the air. There's some of that, but it doesn't seem like it's a major thing. It really feels like there's some small places where that can be done, and maybe only one person can actually do it. Current build of Deadlock contains lots of temporary art and experimental gameplay, is the quote here. I definitely also feel like you could see a completely different looking game. The Deadlock name seems to come from the idea that you're collecting souls as a currency, and that maybe there's going to be some more spookiness to it. You could see how maybe this was supposed to be a more Halloween themed game to start with, although it doesn't feel particularly spooky at the moment, and it has some twists and turns that I'm sure people will figure out. Now, I don't believe this means, though, that you can play unless you've been invited into the NDA beta situation. So them officially announcing this game still could mean it is a very long time away. Remember, the artifact in its first version was known about for a fairly long time. It felt like almost a year before the general public could play Artifact, and it may have been that they had already drastically changed what Artifact was before they even let the general public play it. And after they drastically changed what Artifact was, it didn't really work that well, although Artifact still is available to play if you want to play it. There is something to notice, certainly, in that Valve has their head in fairly narrow directions with their new games and new IPs, in that Artifact was a lane-based card game trying to be an esports MOBA game. No, MOBA might be the wrong term for Artifact. Yeah, I think it really is. Massively online battle arena doesn't really match Artifact, does it? Multiplayer online battle arena, whatever MOBA actually stands for. Deadlock might be more of a MOBA game. But yeah. clearly they've decided that there is a need at Valve to constantly try and develop the next Team Fortress, the next Counter-Strike 2. They've got to keep that audience, and they want to try and grow that audience, although I think that saturation there may be well past the 100% for the number of bots in those games. Perhaps there is a hope that one of those games would launch and become popular enough that they could shut down or make drastic changes to Team Fortress 2 or Counter-Strike 2 to get rid of a lot of the bots. But very likely they just don't care about the bots. So it'll be interesting to see if you start to see cheaters and bot players show up in Deadlock in massive numbers on Steam. But yeah, they definitely feel like they need to make those kinds of games. That being said, they also seem like they are open to making different types of games also, and so they may just be back in the business of making games, although they're not straying too far from the tree. Half-Life continuations or new games are still very much in the wheelhouse of Valve, and we're definitely not seeing anything being made outside of the Source Engine 2. Not seeing anything that isn't a first-person or third-person perspective shooter style of game, really, other than Artifact. I guess that's the one exception there. And I don't know if I have anything else to say about Deadlock. I did see a nice video on YouTube where there's this new GTX no, it's called like ray tracing capture feature or injection. Ray tracing injection maybe is what it's called. Inherently, it's a new way to mod games without actually having to decompile or know how the games are made or have an editor be released by the game developers. What it's doing, NVIDIA's making this, and they said they were going to open source it eventually. What it's literally doing is it's putting a user interface into ray tracing as a function and letting you grab what would be loaded into the or preloaded into the video card's ray tracing memory and say, I just want to overlay a whole new texture, a whole new 3D model into that memory address. So it's very much a wrapper on top of a program type mod using video card and ray tracing as a way of doing that quickly and not introducing a massive amount of delay. So inherently it let this YouTuber take a 3D model of a soda can in Half-Life and replace it with a 3D model of a rubber chicken, and then anywhere in the game, since that preloaded 3D model, preloaded texture will be the same in every instance, so anywhere in the game where there once was a soda can, you now see a rubber chicken. Now, most of the times, I'd say probably 95% of the time, this technology, if it catches on, and frankly it would have to be a little bit more standardized to not just be NVIDIA graphics cards, but if it caught on, it could grab, say, the texture of this wall, and then you could load in a higher resolution, better lighting effects type texture, more reflectiveness being programmed in to replace that texture on the wall. And then anywhere that this texture on the wall would be seen in the game, it would be replaced with higher resolution. So you might just see people working very rapidly to do full-on HD remasters of games. That being said, it's probably something that would only be used years, possibly decades down the line, because you still likely need a game that has modern support for ray tracing and preloading textures. I don't think it's going to be an all-in-one solution where you could take, say, a ROM being emulated of Super Mario Brothers and then use the NVIDIA ray tracing injection feature, whatever it's actually called. Sorry, I don't have the actual name here. It's very early days on this technology, obviously. But yeah, I don't think you could take a ROM being emulated by an emulator for Super Mario Brothers and then replace those 2D bitmapped images with a 3D ray traced model and just massively change the appearance of Super Mario Brothers. Now, in fairness, there probably already are mods that would easily change the 2D bitmapped images of Super Mario Brothers, but yeah, you're not going to get that new technology. You're not going to get the reflectiveness, the 3D modeling, the ray tracing of the light rays. You're not going to get dynamic scaling, if you even get that at all, where things look kind of blurry from a distance, but as you get closer they look better. But yeah, that might add a level of more robustness from games being released these days, in that even if the original creator of games don't want to upgrade the textures or remaster games again, players might be able to do that a lot easier. Fans might be able to do that a lot easier. Moving on, Black Ops 6 multiplayer gameplay appears online. So, yet another leak. This video has been removed. I have a knee-jerk reaction to block when it says video unavailable, but actually it's very informative to know when a video is unavailable, so I won't go with that knee-jerk reaction. And then Avowed is targeting 30 frames per second, says the Obsidian art director. You don't necessarily need that 60 frames, which is probably an excuse on just saying that the game will not really run that well. Here we have the automatic way video games Chronicle looks for links to add into articles is ridiculous. So originally gets turned into Origin, and it labels these links interestingly differently. There's a link reference CSS, there's an A-link internal CSS, and then there is a A-link external CSS, and I have them all looking the same, just like links in general, but they could look very different if I so choose. I could, for instance, get rid of the reference ones, and then the page would be less messy. I could also get rid of the internal ones. I could also get rid of the fact that they're light blue links in the first place, and this could just be all text, which probably makes the most sense. And as far as I can tell, that's it for Video Games Chronicle. I'm not sure if we won't run into more news later. Now that brings us to Gematsu. I have not worked on Gematsu. One of the things I do want to work on, though, is having more of a buffer on Game Developer too. So ideally, the top of every page should be like this, where there is extra space at the bottom and there isn't just one line of text. It's not a big problem if there is one line of text, but I would prefer it to look like this. Griffline announces its Tokyo Game Show 2024 lineup. Very little going here. The goal here, of course, would be to adjust this page so it is also blue background in the same theme. Of course, it is very possible I'll get everything in the same theme, and then I'll get ambitious eventually down the line and try to change the theme for all the pages to my own art style. But I don't know what my own art style would even be at this point, so first things first, let's just get everything consistent. Show a proof of concept that the idea works. Then at some point, if I do decide that there should be a different art style, I'll work from that point. It'll be a lot easier to tweak in the long run. Of course, I may also get all of this done, and then one of these sites may change their entire appearance, and I'll have to start over from scratch. And yeah, this isn't going to by default adjust any other websites, so it's not just applying a theme overall to every page. That would take something different, probably a lot more work. This week's Japanese game releases were Visions of Mana, Gundam Breaker 4, and Imio the Smiling Man, Famicom Detective Club, and more. That's all one title there. Star Wars Outlaws, Vampire Survivors, and Witchspring are getting second billing. Decent amount of games certainly getting released. I think we might be in Golden Week, or close to Golden Week, or just out of Golden Week. I probably should remember or have it on my calendar as far as the Japanese Golden Week goes. Let's see, the King of Fighters 30th anniversary website has also been launched, which I guess the question is, when was the last King of Fighters game, and when is the next King of Fighters game? Noticeably, for being around for 30 years, it's kind of important to point out that I recognize this guy and this girl, and not really any of these other characters enough that I would be able to say for certain I recognize them. This guy with the big ball, maybe I've seen him. These two girls here, maybe I've seen them. Maybe I've seen this girl, maybe I've seen this guy. But yeah, if you showed me some of these characters, I definitely would not be able to really place them. And even this girl and this guy, I'd have a hard time placing them in the King of Fighters series. I would say they're from some fighting game, and that's about as much as I could say. Then it looks to me like we've probably got some things out of order. There's Gensoku Wanderer Foresight getting very mixed reviews, and from May 14th, so while I'm looking at it, I can at least see if I can take it off the follow list. And that's supposed to bring us to the GameDeveloper.com headlines, but I'm seeing that there's only one page here. So, Visual Concepts lays off the staff at Lego 2K Drive Studio South. Which, yeah, Lego 2K Drive, not a particularly successful Lego game. In part, I would assume that because it was just not promoted very well, but also in part because I just don't think Lego translates into video games well as a driving game, a racing game. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It speaks to a base misunderstanding of what Lego is. Yes, there are some Lego sets that have cars, quite a lot of them, in fact, and I'm sure very young kids do like the Lego cars and play with them like kids of old might play with cars. But I think by the time you're even 6 or 7, Lego cars are more things you put on the shelf to show off, not things that you want to pretend are moving fast and rolling on the ground. Lego cars have never been particularly good as toy cars. The pieces fall off and break and all of that. Even when they tried to have more electronics in the Legos, and where you can make little robot RC remote control cars, that was always too expensive for most kids to embrace as far as the Lego concept. Yeah, and if I was a kid, I'd probably still want to just play with Hot Wheels if I was in the cars over Lego, because Hot Wheels just look more like cars than the Lego cars ever could. That is not the end of the show. I'm still needing to move around all these interstitial things. And yeah, my new macro is going to avoid doing any faultless cleanup. This was the page that I was working on to adjust the appearance of Video Games Chronicle. Here's the story where PlayStation 5 is reportedly selling out in China following Black Myth Wukong launch. Like, demand for the game has resulted in PS5 scalping. I wouldn't be surprised if there really isn't a ton of stock for PlayStation 5s in China also, considering how I imagine there's a fairly limited number of games you can actually play in China if they have to be potentially offline games or VPN games, which VPNs would slow any online game down too much. But yeah, again, I wish there was more to say here about Black Myth Wukong, but there really isn't, particularly if you're just trying to avoid trolls on both sides trying to fight culture wars with Black Myth Wukong being in the middle. Here's what the tweets ideally should look like. Yes, I could make it blue background on white text and just match the rest of us, but if you are doing an embedded tweet, it does make a decent amount of sense to just do white on black so it looks different. But yeah, unfortunately, while I can get this picture here to line up exactly to the left here, I can't stretch it out also to line up here. So just keeping it kind of centered is fine. It's not exactly 100% centered. There's more empty space over here. I also was able to adjust the CSS so it would have a bit more margin so words won't fly into the edge and get clipped off. And the big success certainly is just to keep it from having an overflow page footer at the bottom. But I do see that the next step really would be to just get rid of links that don't matter and only potentially keep the external links on Video Games Chronicles, because that's about the only links I would ever click on anyways. And I'd have to remember what the alt color is. It may very well just be called on hover or alt color for links when you hover over them. Yeah. for reading purposes in particular, it kind of makes a lot of sense to get rid of all the links and just make it simple text. The Smurfs Dreams gameplay trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to check that out. There will still be subtle differences, even if everything does look the same. I could work very hard to get rid of as many subtle differences as possible, but it kind of doesn't matter. Although this is a great example here. Gematsu is using, just by this default appearance, is somehow blocking 160 elements from uBlock Origin. Who's to say if that is 160 elements that really need to be blocked, or whether that's actually 160 ads that have loaded up and continuously cycled and reloaded. It does seem like it is the case that several pages do just continuously cycle and try and reload more ads, because this did just jump up to 161. So every minute or two it seems like these pages are trying to load in more. Although it probably isn't actually taking up a lot of RAM, because if it's just an element that's being blocked, there it just bumped up to 162. If it's just being blocked, that shouldn't really take up that much RAM. Inherently, I have to throw out my opinion that the internet is broken because capitalism is trying to corrupt it, and capitalism is broken because it's corrupted itself far too much. And the internet was a much better place in its early days of websites that couldn't afford the bandwidth to fill pages with ads, and thus actually had to provide useful, helpful content, and maybe could show one ad at that point instead of garbage procedurally generated or AI generated articles that are just crammed full of ads, so terrible listicles crammed full of ads. The Toho Gensho Wanderer Foresight is coming to the PS4 and Switch on September 18th. That is probably why that tab was open, that page was open on Steam. And then that should just bring us to all the new games on Steam, so we'll just go through them fairly quickly. Type Your Fate is actually fairly far in the past. On August 21, I was working with the macros, and in part of that I moved back the last games that it should look for to a further number. So we really should just be looking at the 24th, maybe the 23rd. I could certainly start to just dismiss things, but I'm gonna let the macro cleanup deal with that. One of the things I've done working on the next version of the macros is to collect all the links and then open the pages as a second step that will potentially speed up the process, but then have a third step where we curate all of the links at the very end, just until you can't curate anymore. So it's going to just assume you'll be all the way to the left as far as the tabs, and it's going to move all the way to the right. And it's going to look for any pages that are Steam pages and see if any of these tags have things like not safe for work or nudity or things like that, and just automatically close those tabs. That's perhaps potentially a little slower because you're going back to pages at that point, but I think it will just be an easier way in which that works overall. This does give a good example of what we may have missed. I think I can now justify removing skull bones from the follow list. Light ray. Looking for things that would be either the 23rd, probably the 24th, and aren't already on the follow list. I'm still very much also in this weird situation where things getting on my wish list, things getting on the follow list just kind of don't matter. They're just not playing enough games to really justify needing to buy more games, particularly games that I haven't been wanting to buy for a very long time. There's still a lot of old games to potentially buy instead. So yeah, honestly, if the Steam beta for family share works out the way it really should work, in that you can share it with nieces and nephews who live in different houses without doing massive VPN nonsense, then I could see nieces and nephews pushing me to buy games that they want to play, as they flippantly would just want to play everything, and they may just be in a different mindset with a different fandom or different levels of excitement around games. That wouldn't really be a problem. It's just, yeah, it kicks the follow list process down the road as far as just not being very useful. I always want there to be an educational game that's good, but I never really get the feeling that any of it could be good. Yeah, I think I found exactly one game here that I didn't put on the follow list that I do want to put on the follow list. So now we're looking at the 23s, and we're still not really to the point where it's new content. Maybe now. Still a ton of cat games. I'm gonna give this a chance just because it has slightly different art style. But yeah, it is still questionable whether you actually can share your games with people who live in different cities or different states in the United States, or different countries. It seems like they probably won't allow that. But ideally, they would just come out and say, you know what, we'll just have a rolling set of 5 locations and limit it that way. This Compass of Destiny might be something, but I'm not going to highlight a prologue. And I don't think renting a car simulator is necessary either. I was hoping I could point out that Crimson text-based game, but I don't think I'm going to see that. I think it's already out. We're still seeing a lot of clicker games. Still seeing a lot of nothing games. Do I want to highlight a Zumba clone? Sure, why not? It's not like we see those all the time. This is a weird art style, but it's not one I think that's good enough to... Yeah, I don't think I want to promote that, just because if any reason it's just not going to make a good YouTube short. As yet, another thing I haven't worked on, but in fairness, I have worked on several things over the weekend. It was very much a very slow weekend of not playing video games and not scheduling video games on that aspect, but it was a fairly productive weekend as far as programming, as best as I can be productive. I'm not super productive on it. I don't think I'm really to a level where I could work a job as a programmer doing something. Not unless somebody is just really not needing a programmer and they're just blowing a budget, or I can figure out some way to trick them, which, you know, that's a lot of people's job, is frankly just keeping the boss ignorant of the fact that you're not really doing that much. We have something claiming to be Christian stories. Never heard of a holy martyr in Neophotos, but that doesn't mean much. I know that there's a decent amount of that. Martyrdoms and things, particularly in Catholic history. See, you release a game like this and you call it a remaster, and it's hard to really believe it's been remastered much. We're into the 24th, so it's still 2 days because we started so far back. Still mostly garbage. I don't think this one supports English. Otherwise I would have given it a chance. The whole thing about trying to be efficient is, in many ways, just a failed hope. It will always be a failed hope, but as far as I understand it, you're supposed to spend about an hour doing one thing that's more right brain, and spend about an hour doing something that's more left brained. And it's pretty difficult to stay in that cycle or get into that cycle. And personally, it just doesn't actually work for me. I spend maybe an hour or two doing one thing and then I'm just tired and need to take a break, which often is just watching something either on YouTube or something on TV streaming. This Haley 3D Portrait Studio Light drawing references. It's an interesting experiment, certainly. Is this an asset flip game, or is this a somewhat usable face creator where you can drag some dials left and right to get different facial emotions? That's an interesting question, but I guess inherently it's not a game, so I think I'll leave it at that. I'm not 100% sure you're getting the full product here, or if you're just getting the... Yeah, seems to me like it's probably just a sales pitch. And see, this is one of the things that Steam was really tired of seeing, which is links that either will take you around in circles in this case, or links that would just promote other games. Although it is noticeably interesting that this is the thing that, yeah, they seem to have all kinds of different references here also being advertised. It is interesting though that that is the thing Steam is cracking down on too, and that's the thing that's irritating them, is cross promotion. But I think they're thinking, so I think they have several people thinking on several different aspects all at the same time with an overall goal that I've lost faith in this game already, in this software already. I think the overall goal is to have pages that show appropriate information and give as much information as possible, but also eliminate pointless extra advertisement. Let's see. Moving on. We should be finished fairly quickly. We're at the 25th now. Oh, up to the 26th. So yeah. There is still a case also of free games. That I don't want to add things to that are free unless they don't have in-app purchases and are reviewed, have at least 30 mostly positive reviews in 30 days. I don't want to fill my library up with games that turn out to be garbage, or that I just have no interest in. I would like to see, though, see if we can figure out a way to find a game that's been played quite a bit on Steam Deck, so we can look at the new system to highlight games that have mostly been played on Steam Deck. I'll make a YouTube short on that, even though I'm not going to put it on the follow list. These in tycoons are coming far too often. I'll give that a chance. Moe Survivors game, and that looked like. So that's at least slightly different. I don't know if this is particularly video game related, but it is United States censorship related. There's a couple stories worth mentioning that Europe and Europol is apparently trying to pass laws that would let them have backdoors and spy on anyone in Europe and hold on to that data forever. And there's been another case. There's been, I guess, a couple of cases. I hadn't heard about the previous ones of somebody using AI image generation to make, one would assume, realistic child porn, for lack of a better term, which, yeah, being arrested, I'm not super surprised by that. If he's convicted, I'll be a little bit surprised by that, because that would smack in the United States against the freedom of artistic expression. Obscenity laws, though, in states are very much generic, and they federally should be shot down by the Supreme Court, but they won't be. How either one of those really leads to video games, well, if the CEO of Telegram is getting arrested for some reason for having an encrypted communication, then that's one less place that game developers can have secure messaging to communicate between their employees and their workers. And if AI generation and artistic expression gets eroded, then you will start to see things even as far as something like Lollipop Chainsaw be attacked by censorship people, because it is definitely a slippery slope. And I know people roll their eyes at the slippery slope arguments, but it is definitely a slippery slope that they will come after the most extreme versions that most people can agree with, they find distasteful, and then they will just keep on moving the goalpost. Inherently, AI generating of any art only victimizes perhaps the original creators of arts that have been sampled using the AI generated content, but it isn't victimizing an actual child, nor would I argue is really harming society in any way for what somebody may be doing in the privacy of their own home and in the privacy of their own mind. But yeah, nobody ever wants to side with the free speech advocates, or almost the absolute free speech advocates, which I don't even know if I'm 100% pro absolute free speech, but you definitely have to start that way to be a free speech advocate. You have to start with almost everything should be allowed, unless you can make a really good argument that it shouldn't be allowed, and it can't really be an emotional or moral argument. But yeah, that's another story that we probably will never hear the outcome from. Plea deals likely to happen. Inherently, they want to create as many precedents in court cases of people just making plea deals or pleading guilty, or they want open and shut cases to make precedents, so that when it eventually gets challenged, which they will be, they'll have as many incidences of what I would call misjustice to point to and go, well, it went this way before, why shouldn't it continue to go this way? Meanwhile, it's also still worth pointing out that in the United States, the prisons are overflowing and incarceration is massively high. So that's another thing to question on these things. And that's a weird point to kind of end today on, but that's what we're going to end on. Once again, being able to make very short streams when I don't play Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that works a lot better. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.